So the topic of this session is the anatomy of a deal. But before we get into that, your title at Uber is something I'd never really heard before, the SVP of Business. So what exactly does that mean, and how much more than just a deal guy is it?
So this is Travis loves this title because it's broad enough to encompass a whole range of things. So it starts with business development and corporate development, so raising money, M&A, strategic partnerships, and then it includes marketing and high-end government relations, where the nexus between business and government is tight, and that's particularly true in lots of other countries in Asia, where sort of business community and the government community are really tight together. So how you influence the government to have regulations that support you kind of often comes to business. So that's the range of things that come in that role, and I think to simply say it, I sort of am the external face of the company to partners and customers around the world.
So you joined Uber in 2013.
Yeah, September of 13.
Right, and the business has grown a lot since then. So can you walk us through kind of how the business has grown and your experience during that period?
Yes, so I joined in September of 13, so just under 2 years ago. Some days it feels like a decade, some days it feels like a week, but we're in 40 cities, 16 countries about, and today we're in 58 countries, 330 cities, doing 2 to 3 million trips a day. We're at 350 employees, so we've grown about 10x from an employee standpoint. So it's been the wildest ride I've ever been on.
How have things changed in an organization? This, obviously this event today is 12 to 200, and you, crossed that chasm and then some, obviously, in your time there. But how has the company changed culturally? How does it change strategically as you evolve?
Well, so culturally, being in every single time zone means that you have to have a 24/7 operation, and culturally that means sort of hair feels like it's on fire a lot. And then you have to have a culture that's resilient and can take the sort of constant sort of new developments happening, whether it's a regulatory development, it could be an accident, could be an opportunity that we've got, competitors raising money, lots of different stuff to happen in all corners of the globe. Then you got to a point where you can't meet everyone on your staff. You can't hire everyone on your staff. You can't interview everyone who joins your group. And that's when you get past 50 people in your particular group, then it's sort of hard because they're far flung, and you have to trust other people to do the hiring and to carry your cultural values outward to those people and make sure that even though they're in an outpost in Nigeria, that they reflect the company's values in some way, in addition, absorb the local market environment too. So it's a real challenge, but it's probably the thing I love doing most at Uber.
One thing many people have admired about the leadership team at Uber, and just the essence of disruption of what you've created, is the underdog spirit that's fueled that, because there's so much against many companies that are innovating, the forces that are entrenched against them. And so it just made me think of fighters that have been at the top of their game, boxers sometimes, who've talked about the underdog spirit. Evander Holyfield, during his winning streak in the 90s, said the hardest thing about winning was retaining that spirit of an underdog. So can you talk about, as Uber has grown and has gone from being a scrappy startup to now being a much larger company that's the leader in its market, have you been able to retain the underdog spirit, and how has that changed as you've gotten larger and as you've become the leader?
People will say, like, you guys act like too much like underdogs. You're still fighting and scrapping away there, but you're a big company. You have to sort of get into a position where your stature is sort of reflected in your outward attitude. So I think in the last year or so, we've taken some real pains to grow sort of the way we interact with the world without losing the underdog mentality. Because you ask a GM, a general manager of Uber in Paris, if he feels like the 800-pound gorilla or like an underdog, or a GM in Milan, Italy, and you take these places who are leaders in their field, and you say, do you feel like you're winning, like you're 800-pound gorilla and you're just making things happen the way you want? And they'd say no. So we have the underdog mentality everywhere in the company.
And is part of that because you essentially, each city functions as its own startup?
Yeah, that's right. So each city functions as its own business unit, its own CEO, if you will. They have their own P&L, and they do their own hiring and all that. So you really push out a lot of autonomy to the field. And that's important because regulations around transportation are typically decided at the local level. Most public transportation infrastructures are overloaded right now, and we're a little bit of a like a release valve for that. And so it's what's gotten interesting is some of the more forward-thinking mayors have said this is actually great. This means that I'm going to have to make another 20-year investment in this other thing. If this Uber pool thing works, you actually reduce congestion and not have to build new infrastructure. And it's better for the environment because most of our cars are hybrids moving to electric over time. I think we're actually relieving that problem in a lot of places. So the trends, developing world trends are different than developed world trends. I think take a city like San Francisco, they're not building a new subway, they're not building any of this stuff. Buses are packed, everything's packed. So if I can reduce congestion because my cars don't circle for parking, which wastes 30% on fuel, and they're carrying multiple people, then I'm sort of adding to the infrastructure of the city, we hope. Sometimes there's national or broader levels, but they're typically decided there. So the battles are being fought at that level. So you have to have those people be entrepreneurial, and they absolutely feel like underdogs.
What ways, if any, have you throttled down the underdog spirit? Because now you are the leader, maybe the messaging around, stewarding something about the entire industry rather than you against your direct competitors.
Yeah, I think, so what Travis and I talk about is when you're building a big company, in some ways you're building a civilization, right? In that it's got to take into account all kinds of factors that you wouldn't think about as a scrappy startup. In the cities where we're big in, we're a pillar of that community. People rely on us. People want to make sure we're doing good by that community. We're giving rides to those with handicaps, or we're serving underserved areas, we're reducing DUIs. So you truly have to become part of the fabric of that city or that country. And that means you take a kind of somewhat of a moral responsibility for acting like a good citizen. Was
there a point in time, an inflection point, where you started to feel that way?
I think we started to feel that way just around last year, when you saw that in every city Uber had launched in, the product market fit was there. So what we've uncovered is that getting from point A to B is a basic human need. It's not as high in the hierarchy as food and water and shelter, but it's getting from here to there. It's on a hierarchy of needs. And if you have a simple product that works, people all over the world want to use it. And so when you find that out, you're like, holy cow, the only thing limiting my growth is how fast I can launch and how I ingrain myself into that community or that city. So I think when we started to say, like, this works in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in Hanoi, Vietnam, in Lagos, Nigeria, Tokyo, then you start to say, well, we have a real global business on our hands, so we have to sort of take care to make sure the outside world knows what kind of people we really are.
So coming back to the theme for this session about partnerships and about making deals, it's sort of a controversial topic for startups, because as an investor, you look at an early stage company, and the adage goes that that partnerships are kind of BS for early stage businesses, that they should focus more on organic growth, getting the flywheel to spin on the magic of the initial product, and then worry about partnerships later. And if you get that sequencing correctly, maybe it's not such a healthy thing for a startup. So first of all, do you agree with that? And if so, at what stage in the growth life cycle of a startup do partnerships begin to matter?
I'd say that it very much depends on the nature of the business. So I'll give you some examples. So in our business, it's not just a technology business. I have real metal and real cars that are taking real people to places. So the online to offline component means we're as much of a business as a tech business. Right, so I've got a partner with early days at Uber, big car fleets, because they had supply. We have to do deals with insurance companies, auto manufacturers, loan providers, gas companies. So for our business, it's existential to have a strong partnerships function, and it has been since the beginning. If you're Facebook or Google and you have servers and you're designing a product, partnerships are less important. You're looking for that virality, that growth that picks up on itself, that doesn't have to scale in human dimensions, but in dimensions of servers, so it's different. But take Instacart or something like that. They have to do deals with the grocery store companies. They have partnerships that they have to do too, and that's an offline-online thing. So I think it depends on the nature of the business. I'm biased, so even if you had just a tech business, I would say you ought to be out there building relationships, because someday you will need partnerships to accelerate your business or to take into new territories, or to do M&A, or all those things. So I think you ought to always have a partnership function, but you may not scale it as big in a more tech pure play.
Yeah, and we'll talk about global expansion in a minute, but certainly when you enter a market like China or India, partners begin to matter more.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, global expansion, or even maybe more pertinent to companies in this room, just market expansion by cities. As investors, we look for companies that are disciplined about, when they choose to focus on growth in existing markets versus expand into new markets. You've obviously done that in new cities within the United States, and then you've also done that outside of the United States in countries like China and India, and obviously throughout Europe. What is the discipline that's important for startups to enforce as they think about same-store sales growth versus new store sales growth, and how do you connect that with your experiences at Uber?
Once we found product market fit, meaning we had more users than we can handle, and we did that in 10 cities in the US, and then we tried one in Europe, and then we tried one in LATAM and one in Asia, and we tested each culture, size of city, everything. We said, wow, it kind of works everywhere. Then it's all about getting scale faster. I think, had we not found that and tried to scale, we stayed in San Francisco for 1 year, only San Fran. And then New York was our second market for the next 9 months. So we were only in 2 markets until we perfected how to operationally do this. Had a playbook, figured out who to hire and how to send them out to the next 10 cities. After we got the first 12 cities or so, one on every continent, and we knew we could make money, then we sort of, we let the floodgates out. Now we're still, it's still a sprawling enterprise to manage. I won't say that we've solved the problem of how to roll out and manage a company that's this big, but we certainly know that we have something and how to launch it efficiently, what type of people we need to hire to get it. And I wouldn't have done that had we not made it work in sort of 5 to 10 markets first.
For companies that are looking to expand into China and India in particular, and I don't mean to lump those together, they're quite distinct, but any sort of general advice that you would give?
China, you got to be prepared for China. Competitiveness is fierce there. And all kinds of tactics that we wouldn't use here are used there, and you have to, again, be resilient enough to withstand them. Also, the Chinese business markets, they subsidize consumer services for a lot longer than we do before they try to turn on profitability, so you have to have the balance sheet to go the distance. You've got to have local Chinese people in your company who work there on the ground to interact with the government, to understand the business culture, to kind of read the tea leaves and understand things you might miss when things are being translated. So I could talk for an hour about China because I spend most of my time on it now. And
do partnerships matter more in those markets?
They do, just to prove that you have a local partner. So our partner there is Baidu. Our competitor in China has its investors are both Alibaba and Tencent, 2 of the biggest Chinese tech companies. They got together, which is rare for them because they're mortal enemies from a business standpoint. So what's my strategy to compete in China because the products don't seem differentiated? Products are very differentiated. So we were the first company in China that essentially did peer-to-peer, private cars, not commercial livery. So we accessed a pool of supply that is amazingly large in China. So we were able to take that risk, frankly, and Didi wasn't. So we got supply growth moving faster than they did, so my wait times were lower. They have a broadcast model where you bid on a ride, basically. For us, it's more known. So there are some key product differences, and then there's tech differences. Uber Pool, which we just launched in Chengdu, China, is a massively complex big data algorithm problem that really, to make the economics work, you have to be very good at it. And if you don't, you're going to burn a lot of cash. And then the brand stuff. Chinese citizens, they respect American brands. They love Apple. They love Xiaomi too. So there's some brand differentiation there. So I think it is telling that the reason they got there together is to counter us because they think we're pretty good. So we announced that we're raising money in our Uber China subsidiary there to get local Chinese investors some exposure to Uber China. So we're doing a lot of stuff there to win. Having one of those 3 behind you is an important sort of stamp of approval, and it's very hard to do without a partner.
So a key part of growth and a key part of the expansion of your team has been your ability to hire an outstanding team.
Yeah.
You've seen that at other organizations that scaled, and so I'm wondering, what have you learned over the years in terms of hiring, retaining great talent, training them, that sort of thing.
So I will say that the weakness on my teams, I do less training by formal training and more put them in the mix and see what we could do. I think I built one of the best teams around. You guys know some of them. Eric Alexander, who is at another Kleiner company. Some of the people I've worked with for years, I brought back in at Uber. I think what I'm looking for is really, as part of our cultural values at Uber, is fierceness. People who are willing to who have the confidence to go and do things that are seemingly impossible. I think if you asked anyone, would Uber be the biggest have a shot at being the only American tech success in China at a grand level, people would say hell no, and Travis said hell yes, and I like to hire people who have that same mentality. And then motivating them is easy when you can actually back them up with a great product. So those two together are kind of awesome, right? Because I send people in to do a partnership or India and China that's seemingly impossible, but they have the force of a great product and consumers who love it behind them. Those two combined keep them motivated.
And do you find that your selection process to determine that tenacity, it's probably nonlinear, it's probably not like standard interview questions. What kinds of things are you looking for?
I like people who are multidisciplinary. So I have a lot of former bankers or lawyers, enterprise salespeople, people who've had to use every tool in their belt to get something done. I ask somewhat seemingly innocuous questions like, how do you work with a lawyer on a deal? And if that business person says, well, the lawyer has their part, they do indemnities and limitation liability, and I do like the business terms, it's out, right? Because that means they're not curious. They don't really dig in to understand what it takes to get a deal over the finish line, which is part sales, part finance, part legal. So people who have the breadth and the curiosity to take a whole strategic effort and make it into something, and who have the relationship skills.
Now you've got both a business background and a legal background. Do you use them both equally? How important is that hybrid background in what you do?
I mean, in this job, when I joined this, Uber had just raised the round we raised from Google about 2 years ago. And Travis, that was $250 million, huge round. He said, this is the last fundraiser we'll ever do, Emil. I said, all right, so I better focus on other stuff. And we raised $6 billion in the last 2 years after that. So I feel like I've been using my finance skills more than my legal or business skills. I was a banker for a bit too. The lawyer stuff just helps you frame how to structure something that can get over the finish line, but it's useful.
And how do you retain that consistent cultural DNA despite the fact that you're in so many markets? And as you said earlier, each market sort of functions as its own startup in terms of that tenacity and that fearlessness and that culture. But how do you retain that common denominator?
We have a very sophisticated interview process that we've honed over time, so you can get cultural matches really fast.
And we are out of time. Thank you, Emil, for spending this time with us.